Hello, everyone, and welcome to Economics with David M. Walker. I am your host today, Kimberly Calhoun. I'm taking Nick Palaveda's place just for the day because he's away on vacation, enjoying his time with his family. Nick, if you can hear me, if you're listening, I hope that you are safe and having lots and lots of fun, and we'll see you next week. Anyway, today on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, former U.S. Comptroller General of the United States, we will be discussing the national debt issues and the student debt issues, which I think are very, very important that we start discussing these, making people more aware of the real issues that are occurring. And with us today, just to kick off this show, we have one of our producers from Pod TV and International Broadcast TV, Mark Lee. He's been with us for quite some time. He's been in radio for many, many years, and he hosts and directs many of our TV shows. Mark, why don't you come and join us?
Join you and everything. So glad to do that. Go to that screen because I like that screen better. Hey, Shaquille's here too. Shaquille's here. Maybe he's got some economic news for us. Oh, he's got his COVID mask on. I don't know.
Oh dear. No. So why don't we go ahead and bring all the way from down under Australia, because as we know, our TV show is global. Shaq Latimer, I missed you.
And of course, for those returning, welcome home. Thank you and good evening.
Good evening to you all the way from Australia. Wow. So what's up with the mask, Shaq?
Jack, on the plane.
Okay, you're on
I'm
the
still
plane.
on the plane.
Gotcha.
So from what I am aware, Shaq, you're just taking all the precautions necessary so that we're all safe. So anyway, you're on a plane. Where are you going?
If I remember correctly,
I'm just going back to Perth.
Right, heading back home, right? I think Shaq is heading back home, if I remember correctly.
I got Anyway, so some of the things.
Shaq bounced off, but I think he was
we
returning
love
back home.
Technology today that somebody can actually beam in on our TV show from an airplane. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, we've had people beam in from boats and, now from airplanes. I think that is just so fabulous.
It is so fabulous, Kim. We've had them beam in from boats. We've had them beam in from airplanes. I think we've had them beam in even, I remember I had one person beam in from like a resort in Bali and everything. And I think there was somebody else that beamed in from that's right, there were a couple of monks that beamed in from like monasteries, including I think at least on a couple of shows, I think at least 2 or 3 all the way from Tibet. So we've had people beaming in from Tibet and from places that are more exotic in nature. And then of course we get people beaming in from places like New York, Texas, definitely California, and a number of other places all along the U.S., but like you said, around the world as well. So we're definitely around the world, and we've got somebody beaming in to us, talking to us, because apparently Rajendra Manalel is saying hello and wanted to know what our topic is today. And I know one of those topics is something that means a lot to me because, it was many decades ago. I think y'all have that commercial that y'all teased me about, that 100 years of experience. Is one of Nick's great commercials that he did, and all along those lines. And yes, I do have extensive experience, having graduated way back in December of '84, and we're almost coming up on 2024 will be in 2 years. So that would have been 40 years since the graduation and all of that. But that being said, I do know that, unfortunately, and part of that is my own fault and all of that, I'm still dealing with economic debt from way back then that had to do with those lovely student loans. And I'm not the only one. I think that there's some people that even went to school in the 70s and stuff that are facing some of those debts as well. And part of that is the payback system and other things. And I know that even Biden and others have talked about the loan forgiveness and all along those lines. But definitely it is something that has impacted a number of us in the economic landscape, our personal economic landscape, and all along those lines. But it definitely is something that, as I know you and Nick oftentimes talk about, we're not taught about financial literacy not all that much in college, and definitely not in high school. I would even argue some of the grad schools don't even do a great job of teaching it as well, like those that go to law school and become doctors if they're going to medical school and all along those lines. But I'm going because I'm, like I said, I live around the corner from Duke. So I know that there's some doctors that, this is 2022. So, maybe about 2072, I probably won't be on this planet, but hey, I'm going for 200. So maybe I will still be on this planet and everything, but they might still be facing what I'm facing some 50 years from now and all along those lines. But what are your thoughts? Will we ever get this student loan situation situated, and will people ever not have to pay this kind of debt that buries them in debt for decades?
Well, and Mark, you bring up a good point. There's some people who have been in debt since, maybe the 70s and 80s, and that's just, to me, totally uncalled for. We've always had somewhere in our time frame since then an economic situation where everyone could be employed quite well before they started outsourcing our jobs to China and India, which did take away our ability to earn income and pay back our debts. Right. I mean, and I watched this happen in the course of my lifetime, where I saw all of our engineering jobs just get totally wiped out in the United States. And, people were losing their mortgages. They couldn't afford to pay their student debt. But I think it all stems from what we're taught in school. And I think if David M. Walker was here, he would agree with me that majority of the situation that has been established and set up was truly just to make us indentured slaves. Okay, we're going to get you educated. You can't really get a good job without being educated. And if you're educated, you're a more valuable asset to the government and to society. So we're going to get you educated, but we're going to tie your hands so that you can never do anything else but work very, very hard for us to pay off that debt. But by not teaching us financial literacy in school, the true life skills, I mean, come on, they beat algebra into my brain and, right. Until I hated it. And geometry, I mean, really, I don't use those skills anymore. Even when I went into engineering, rarely did I use those skills. They were great for expanding my mind and everything. But majority of the time I thought the formulas were stupid. And, that's just me. I work things different than what men create and women do. So, but the thing is I learned over time that most of our higher education platforms were really in place so that they could see that someone was willing to do the due diligence for 4, 6, 8 years to do a job, to become someone that was worthy of hiring. And quite honestly, I pick on Nick about this all the time. Without a PhD, you have no credibility in most of the world. And, I'm one who does not have a PhD. So, of course, but when these guys really want the job done, they come to people like you and me, because we might be highly educated, but we also use elbow grease and get the job done. We're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and say, let's get the job done. And it's because of that we are the builders and creators. Higher education is necessary, I think, in many ways, because, it's about people who have learned something, did something, learned something, and now they're sharing it. But they're sharing it at a cost that people will never be able to gain back in their lifetime. I mean, when and the other problem I have, Mark, that just really irritates me is all these people who go, we shouldn't forgive or cancel the student loan debt. I mean, what kind of people are these? Because, they get a debt in credit card or mortgage or something like that, but they can get those as adults. Okay? Right. Their debts are as adults. And guess what? As adults, they should know better, but they can charge off those debts, but they should know better. If you really can't pull it off, then maybe you shouldn't get it. And then they can file bankruptcy like Trump did 6 times, or, like other people. And I'm glad we have that for some people to give a fresh start. But you're giving a mortgage basically to a child, a minor, who could never apply for that amount of loan any other time in their life at that moment. And then because they have the student debt, they can't get a mortgage for a house. So you have stopped stimulating the economy by putting that block in their way. And you think, well, they should be smart enough to get out of this student debt. But you put them in debt. You put a child in debt who couldn't even read a contract if they wanted to. Couldn't. In fact, majority of the people, parents who help their children apply for FAFSA and all these other things, they really don't understand what they're getting themselves into. And these are highly educated engineers, accounting people who go, whoa. You know, when school's out for the kid and they start seeing that debt come in different sections, they're like, what the heck did we get? And
but it's not just
subsidized. I mean, there's just, and they screw these students because they know they're ignorant.
Not only that, but what is the number one thing that people are told of when they go to school? It's like, there is people, and of course there's even some people that go to school looking for either their Miss or their Mr., meaning they're looking for their significant other in high school and or college. But one of the other things that they sell you is that at some point or another, you're going to get a house, your own home. Fortunately, my mom got me a home that me and my brother shared for several years, and that I had a loan for a while. But the majority of my housing experience has been in apartments, and I definitely don't mind apartments and all along those lines. But at some point I might want to get a house, or I may want to even inherit one of the family houses, because there are houses in the family, including some that some cousins live in and things along those lines. But the thing is that apparently the World Bank recently, I think it was last week, said that the housing crisis, which is another crisis, could impact 1.6 billion people. That's like what? That's almost a fourth of the population by 2025. So we're not even talking that long from now. We're talking 3 years. And they're saying that the shortage of land, lending, labor, and material are some of the factors fueling that housing crisis. And the world needs to build 96,000 new affordable homes every day to house the estimated 3 billion people who will need access to adequate housing by 2030, according to UN Habitat. And efforts to build more affordable homes are underway in countries including the United States, India, Scotland, and Africa. And I know right here in Durham, every time I turn around, I was on a bus recently, and we were talking about that. There are new apartments popping up left and right. We're trying to figure out who's buying these apartments because they're not exactly cheap. I want to say that near the bus terminal. So, as I said, it's near a bus terminal, which means you're going to hear a bus coming in and out all day long and everything. I want to say that those are going for like around $1,500 and all along those lines, which is cheap if you're in New York or California. And that's where I think some of these people are coming from, because they're getting what they consider to be a discount. But for those of us that were already here, not as much of a discount and all along those lines. And I want to say there's some even in the heart of downtown that are not even more expensive. I think that in talking to one of my acquaintances, they were saying, because they'd done some pricing, that there were some that were in around the $2,000 and $3,000 mark as well. And I'm going like, okay, so I get it. You're coming from New York City and you can afford that. But how many people are actually coming from New York City and all of that?
I want to bring up another point with the student debt situation. Okay. So, and again, it's like you say, the rent is really, really high. Mm-hmm. Our children in the United States were required to pay their student debt, right? Mm-hmm. We're required to pay for their education, which isn't cost effective anymore. Actually, if you look at what you get after you graduate, then you're expected to pay for the cost of living, their medical bills, their insurance, their cars, their transportation, and it adds up. And I mean, when I added up what my son had to spend to go to college for 4 years, it was over $200,000. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about, including, because, that's not true. Yeah, it is. Okay. Go look at the cost of education, then go look at, but, fortunately for us, he got a lot of grants and scholarships. But let me tell you where the worst of all of this is, Mark. And I hope that when David gets on, we'll be able to talk about this. What irritates me more than anything is we will bring foreign students in from other countries and they get a free education. Now, and I learned this for true because I picked up some students to take them to hackathons and things like that. They get our Social Security to live off of when they're over here. They get free medical care, they get food stamps, and they get a roof over their head. They don't pay a dime to get a 4, 6, 10-year education while they're here. And then they take that knowledge base back to their country and use it while they are outsourcing our jobs that, when we paid for the education, we paid for the Social Security, we paid for our children's living expenses. They get everything for free, then take our jobs. Okay, so that's why we have an economic situation in this country.
The economic situation is ridiculous because one of the things they said, and it's not
That's
just
why we have a debt problem.
Yeah, well,
because
totally.
you are taking our jobs for highly educated people. We paid full education, but then and that cost us money. That's why education is so high. We're giving it away free to tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of students from other countries. But we're not just giving them that for free. We're giving them our Social Security that I paid in. And my child didn't get to use that Social Security to live off of. He didn't even get to use it when he was stuck in New York during COVID and had no, money or income coming in for himself. So I have an issue with us giving more when I'm from this country. My child was born in this country. I paid taxes. I pay into Medicare, but we don't get any of those benefits. That's what I have a problem with.
Yeah, I definitely can see that being a problem, and definitely going to add to that conversation as well as something else that I was just thinking about as well. But even coming back, because I think they're all tied together. Even with the housing, they were saying that in a study of 200 cities globally, 90%, I did say 90%, I didn't say 9, are found to be unaffordable to live in, with the average home costing more than 3 times the average income. Because, there's that formula that I think is supposed to be, 20% of your income is supposed to go toward housing or something like that, and then the rest is supposed to go to food and other things that you need in order to survive. And I may have the formula not exactly right, but I do know that it is not nearly 50% or 40% or 60%, which is what some people are paying, and then they're trying to live off of the other 40% that the rent and other things have not taken, and all along those lines. And definitely they're saying the United States alone is short of 1.5 million homes, and that was from Moody's Analytics, and the country has less housing for sale or rent than at any time in the past 30 years. So definitely we got to do something about the housing. But one of the other things, coming back to education and even education alone, is I've been part of a couple of business conferences and things along those lines. And one of the things that they oftentimes talk about is what's twofold. One thing they talk about is this notion that the money needs to circulate within whatever your community is, meaning that because definitely within our African-American community, unlike some other communities, the money stays in the community before it goes out into the rest of the world. Whereas in the case of the African-American, there's some other populations, I think the Hispanics might be similar, though not as bad, where it literally will circulate just for a matter of, as soon as you get it, you spend it, and it's going outside of your own community and all along those lines. So I know that people have talked about that, and they've also talked about this notion of getting involved in new things that are out there. And apparently not enough people are getting involved in these spaces, particularly here in the US, because there's this new lovely thing called the metaverse, and apparently a lot of people are researching and doing things in the economics of the metaverse. And you can create your own worlds, you can create your own shopping centers, you can create your own this or that, but we don't know that enough people are, one, learning about the metaverse, and two, doing enough to actually get involved in it at the ground level. But I've got good news for you, Kim. I think next Tuesday, not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday, we'll be starting a series about the metaverse. So Nicole Maxwell, who is actually, I believe, from the DMV area, and who has been having conversations with me and everything, will be starting her series on the metaverse very soon. So we'll be learning about everything from the blockchain to how the metaverse actually works. So definitely wanted to share that with you. So that should be coming on next Tuesday.
Well, and I am very excited to hear about the new shows that are coming on Pod TV. For most people who don't know, we converted from IBM TV to Pod TV. We are now broadcasting or beaming out to, as Nick says, over 120 countries, and we like to believe that we're bringing you the real stories,
Right.
the real people who believe in real journalism ethics. Okay. We don't put gag orders, no expectations, as Mark can attest. He's been with us 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years now.
Yeah, and that's why we built this network. We wanted the truth to come out, the true stories. We didn't want it to be all drama. Of course, you're going to have some drama when we're all debating and talking about
Right.
issues because we each have different beliefs. But what we wanted to do was bring you the real information, the real intelligent information from the real people who are actually going out to the conferences and actually sitting in the meetings. We're not news people by any means, but what we are good people who collect good data, who don't have any problems sitting in front of a camera and discussing what's really going on in the world or in our part of the world. And one of the things I like about Pod TV is we've got TV shows that come in from Malaysia, that come in from India, from we even had one from China. Because it was good to get the real stories, so we are constantly collecting TV shows from other countries that will provide us information, because to let you know something very important here when we're talking about the national debt, that globally, that's very important to collect data from people around the world. Okay. And just because we have United Nations and government that communicate from around the world about these issues supposedly for our benefit, doesn't mean they really are. They're all politics and they're all politicians. And it's up to us. It's our job, people. Yeah, we have the politicians, but it's up to us to do a lot of this due diligence too. And this is one of the things I love about David, is that he talks about our fiduciary duties, right? What we are responsible for and what we need to do to correct these problems. And I believe him because he sat in that office for the United States for years, and he saw the problems, the challenges that they go through to correct any problem. But our national debt, and where we're at, is impacted by a lot of things, and it impacts the ripple effect, impacts a lot of things globally. So here we have people coming in globally and discussing this. And I think that given that we are able to do this, maybe we can help expand the knowledge base so that people make better choices for themselves. Because like when we were discussing COVID, and we knew it was coming down the path towards us like a freight train, but a lot of us were able to stock up and batten down hatches 2 weeks before Trump even said anything, even though he had all the same information as we did. But because we had this information, we were able to share it and get it out there to some of the people who were really listening to us. They were able to at least take precautions. I mean, some of the things I'm able to do because I listen to people from around the world. I started buying hybrid cars, right? Why not? Why be dependent on oil and gas when we knew it was coming from other countries for many, many years? Why not start establishing our own resources, right? And be better with our economic situation. Guess who's here?
I just saw that David was there, and that's actually what I was going to ask him, because I'm sure he's got some thoughts along what I'm going to bring up and everything. But I hear you. But one, I know that Shaquille is not the biggest fan of hybrid cars, and I hate that he bounced off, because I know that he sometimes talks about the cost of some of those electric cars and things with the charging stations and other things. But I don't like to put words in people's mouths when they're not around, but I have gotten a little bit of an understanding of where he is coming from. But one of the things that we were talking about, David, was the student loans and all of that. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, and I had mentioned that even though I graduated many years ago, back in the ice ages of the 80s, I am still under some of those student loan problems as well. And apparently the payment freeze on student loan payments, which was prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic, will come to an end in August. So the end of August, which means in about a month. So about a month and a week from now, all of that will come to an end, and some of the borrowers are running around trying to, and I might be one of them eventually, trying to figure out what they're going to do, whether that's going to be reconsolidating, coming up with income-driven repayment plans, asking for a forbearance, or doing a number of things to try to delay the payment or work out the payment so that you don't have to face any other kind of harsher consequences, including garnishments and things along those lines. But I'm just wondering your thoughts around this. And has anybody ever been taught about this stuff? Because I know when I was in the high school and college way back in those ice ages, I don't remember being taught that I might be dealing with a debt some 40 years after I graduated from Marquette University.
Well, first,
Hello,
I
David.
think, hi, good morning, Kimberly. Good. Mark, first, I think
morning.
it's important to understand that only 14 out of 50 US states require some type of financial literacy course in high school before you can graduate.
Mm,
That should be 50 out of 50 plus DC.
agreed.
And clearly, a key part of that is helping people to gain a better understanding of student loans. That's just one small piece of the bigger puzzle. Believe it or not, the biggest asset on the balance sheet of the federal government is student loans, about $1.8 trillion. My personal view is that the federal government, through its easy lending practices, has served to increase the cost of education and has served to cause some people to take these loans in circumstances where, quite frankly, it didn't make sense.
Right.
You know, for a long time, when you and I were growing up, we were told you got to have a college degree,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not all college degrees are the same.
Mm-mm.
Not all institutions are the same. Not all specialties are the same. And what I feel bad about is that you have some people who went to college, got a degree from a questionable university, got a degree in an area that's not marketable, and yet they have these huge loans that they now have to somehow try to be able to deal with. Okay. I personally am, absent fraud, absent a fraudulent arrangement where it was a fraudulent institution or whatever else, I don't believe in forgiving these loans. I do believe, and by the way, the president doesn't have the authority to forgive the loans. That's like, it's like the president giving away a federal asset. The president does not have that authority. Okay. I am open-minded to providing more flexibility with regard to repayment. But I think, based upon income and other circumstances, but I do think we have to think broader. Our whole system needs to be re-engineered, because the fact is we need to do a much better job of matching the macroeconomic needs of our economy with the individual abilities and desires of individuals. And in some cases, that means that they should go to college. In some cases, it means that we should provide greater incentives for them to get degrees that actually can help our macro economy and help them individually. And in some cases, it means that we ought to be encouraging them and providing assistance for them to enter a trade or some other areas where they can provide a good living for themselves and their family, and where there is a need in the economy. There are countries that do this, Germany being one. We're way behind the curve.
But
And so those are just some of my thoughts.
I hear what you're saying, David, and I want to bring in Steve, if that's all right, Kim.
Sure.
I think I see he popped in and all, but there was a particular industry that was very much involved in the development of certain communities, namely certain minority communities and all of that. And that industry, a lot of these folks make a whole lot of money and they do really well and all of that. But they also were recently, at least in one case, forgiven debt. And I'm thinking about the beauty industry, because apparently one of the things that happened last month was $238 million of worth of student loans was forgiven for some 28,000 students of a former School of Beauty. And I don't know, maybe Kim can to attest to this, but I've got some friends of mine that are definitely in that space and everything. And I can tell you, those beauticians and those barbers, particularly on the beautician side, make almost as much as some doctors that I know, coming back to your trade point and all along those lines. So I'm sitting there going like, wow, I would think that they would have been able to probably pay back their student loan just based on some of the costs I've heard for some of the hair treatments that are out there, because some of them are in the hundreds of dollars.
Well, let's add a little bit of humor here for a second for our audience, okay? I'm personally not real good with plumbing, okay? I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not good at plumbing. So when I have a plumbing problem, I'll call a plumber. Well, I heard about this one guy who had a plumbing problem. He called a plumber. The plumber came out, fixed the problem in about 15 minutes, provided a bill for $250. And the person who had asked him to come out said, $250? You've only been here 15 minutes. I didn't make that when I was a lawyer, partner in a law firm. And the plumber says, yeah, I know. I used to be a lawyer too.
Yeah, I'm a recovering
so
lawyer.
true.
Yeah, lawyers are. Well, it's such an honor to be here with David. It's great to see you. Sorry, my backdrop's back in my bonus room. I had to come up to actually get some work done. Speaking of debt, I got a lot of being a city council member in politics doesn't pay the bills, and I'm about to buy a new car and got a daughter coming back to Carolina from gap years. So all of a sudden the checks are getting pretty big. So,
and you got the fan on because it's hot.
It's freaking hot. It's hotter than it's hotter.
That's
than
a whole nother
what.
cost that everybody's got to deal with.
David, I want to
I
bring
want
up
to answer Mark's question real quick
Yeah,
about
please.
something, because David really kind of honed in on this in the very beginning. In all of our education system, whether you're taking a trade school for beautician, which, by the way, I think is a great job because they can't outsource that. Okay, you got to be local to do that, but
That's
they
right.
don't teach financial literacy. So if you take a loan because you can go out and get loans to do these trade schools as well. They don't teach you how to pay it off. Everyone says, oh, I see, this is the minimum I have to pay. They don't think beyond that. They don't realize that the interest rate is accruing faster than because they set up a payment. And they do this intentionally, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but they do this intentionally. The payment is below the ability to pay off the debt. It is always going to accrue more. They should be forced to say, if you add a little more so that you are paying it off, but they don't. So these people, by the time 5 years goes by, they look at that and they go, my God, I've gotten nowhere. And then they get depressed. And then they might lose their job, because our jobs, they're not always here. When you outsource a lot of jobs and lay off a lot of people in a local area, then the hair cutters aren't doing anything. Then the barbers aren't doing anything. The makeup.
Exactly.
The ripple effect.
Before I asked David, a story, there's an Indian man that lives in North Carolina named Ravi Patel. He's a huge hotelier. And for the many of these Indians came in, they got in the hotel business because he's a big guy in Charlotte, but they'd have a place to stay so they wouldn't have to pay food and pay for rent. And he would take his cash and keep it under the pillow. And one day he had like thousands of dollars of cash because husband would open up a bank account. But the point is, they were never in debt. They made money. And I think that's, but my question is that, under Reagan's presidency, the federal debt increased from $738 billion to $2.1 trillion. So it's not so much a Democrat or Republican problem. Obviously, we're adding on to that. We're making it worse with all this money we're pumping in. But where do we go wrong, David, with the fact that, debt, we all have debt. As a city council, I can tell you, we issue bonds, but we never do it beyond our means of repaying that, paying down the interest, paying down the principal, right? Did we go awry around that time where we just felt like we were just adding on to the debt?
Well, Steve, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that I'm working on right now is to try to get a federal constitutional amendment for fiscal responsibility. And there are two ways that you can get a constitutional amendment. The old-fashioned way, where a majority of the Senate and the House propose an amendment, two-thirds of the Senate and the House propose an amendment, send it to the states, three-quarters have to ratify. That's how we got in 27. There's a second way. If two-thirds of the states file an application for a convention of states to propose amendments, then Congress shall, non-discretionary, set the date and place for a convention. Turns out I and a few others have done a lot of research in the last 9 months and found out that We exceeded the 34 state requirement in 1979, and yet Congress never did anything. And so now there are a number of efforts underway to try to force the Congress to have a limited state-led fiscal responsibility amendment convention that would focus, in my view, on debt to GDP, not balanced budget or things of that nature. Well, guess what's happened since 1979? Debt has gone up from about 830 billion to 30.5 trillion. Total liabilities and unfunded promises have gone up from less than 10 trillion to over 110 trillion. And the value of the dollar has declined by over 70%. The truth is that statutory approaches to constraining federal spending and deficits and debt have not worked. They won't work. We've got to take a constitutional approach. Now, you and I as individuals, there are market checks and balances on how much we can borrow. States and localities, there are some checks and balances on how much you can borrow. Okay.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I think the rating agencies do a lousy job of evaluating the creditworthiness of government debt. And the reason being is they only look, and this is through firsthand meetings I've had with them, they only look at the ability of the borrower to be able to stay current for 5 to 7 years. And in many cases, state and local governments, they have huge unfunded obligations that may not come to fruition within the next 5 to 7 years, but are eventually going to come to fruition. And they don't give adequate consideration of that. So,
yeah.
The answer is we've got to have a constitutional limit at the federal level.
And playing Roku TV Jeopardy. And if there's anybody in this world who would know the answer to this question, it's Dave Walker. How many times has that happened in the United States? A constitutional amendment.
How many times has what happened?
A constitutional amendment.
27.
You're going 27, yeah.
There you go.
And all of them have been the old-fashioned way. But there was one time where the states almost got the requisite number of states to be able to hold a convention of states to propose amendments.
But it hasn't happened since 1992.
Was that the ERA amendment?
No, that was the amendment to have direct election of senators.
Okay.
In 1913. Okay. And that's one of the things that undercut states' rights, because then senators got directly elected by the people. And so they could pander to the people just like members in the House. Whereas before, and again, the old system wasn't perfect by any means. Before, if you didn't protect states' rights, you didn't get reappointed. Well, what's happened to states' rights? They've been eviscerated. Okay. And so now the Congress is trying to deny the states the option to be able to hold a convention of states to propose amendments, which I'm fighting to make sure that the states have their day.
Hey, David, one question I was curious about.
Wait, one just minute, time out. David, I saw this on LinkedIn, and maybe you can explain this because this is part of your mission and part of your fight. I think this is beautiful what I read. I came across it from Jim Pierce. I don't think he minds because he posted this publicly. He said, saw this while driving through Washington, D.C. this morning, and wonderful how many of our elected officials fully realize how important this is. Thank you, David M. Walker. So can you explain a little bit about what this is? This is at a bus stop. It's the national, it's an advertisement. It's very beautiful. The national debt. I wish I could find a bus stop like this.
First,
what is this about, and how can we become more involved to help you do this?
Well, first, Jim Pierce and I play pickleball together.
Okay,
I do. Pickleball players. Okay, so that's how we know each other. And he saw this on the way going to work in downtown DC. This was something that was funded by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. And I was the first CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. This is part of their public education and awareness campaign. And it is a very attractive looking bus stop. Unfortunately, I doubt very many senators and members of Congress will ever use this bus stop. So the bottom line is that, one of the things that has to happen, we need a massive national public education engagement campaign to help the public understand that the current path that we're on threatens our economic security, our national security, our domestic tranquility, and their futures and the future of their families. Both fiscal policy and monetary policy are unsustainable. Too much spending, too much loose money. You have too much money chasing too few goods. You combine that with how we've dramatically changed energy policy, with supply chain challenges, et cetera, you get inflation. And that's what we have right now, which is the cruelest tax of all. It hurts people that are on fixed income. It hurts people that are low income. And we've got to do something about it. And, I come back to what I said. It's not just education engagement. It's a constitutional constraint, because the only thing that will ensure that the Congress, restores fiscal sanity is a constitutional requirement to do so.
And that's one of the things I was going to get to, because we talked about that on the news show earlier and everything. And I'd love to hear David's thoughts about this. Is my understanding that the Federal Reserve, which is definitely very much involved in our fiscal policies, is a relatively new institution compared to others. I think it was created back in 1913 due to a financial crisis of that time frame, as I was finding out from my research and everything. So I was wondering, could you explain maybe to our global audience and to definitely the audience around the United States, one, why the Federal Reserve is important, and two, why it is needed in this time, if you think it's needed in this time, or whether we need to get away from it, because it's not that much. It's a fairly newer institution.
Well, first, three things happened in 1913 that, in my view, served to dramatically increase the size and scope of the federal government and undercut states' rights. Number one, the income tax was adopted, which provided a new source of revenue to fuel the growth of government. Secondly, the Federal Reserve was established, which provided a basis to be able to control interest rates and, in recent years, self-deal in U.S. debt. All right. And thirdly, there was the direct election of senators rather than having them appointed by state legislatures. If you look at what's happened macro from 1912 to today, the federal government has gone from 2.5% of the economy to about 24% of the economy last year, and rising. If you look at what's happened to states' rights, they've been significantly undercut. Okay. So the Federal Reserve was established for a variety of reasons to deal with national banks. They also deal with monetary policy, which is money supply, interest rates, and a variety of other factors. My personal view is the Federal Reserve should be focused on two things and two things alone.
Okay.
Number one, try to maintain stable prices over time, which is what inflation is all about. And number two, to try to be able to promote economic growth. I don't think they should be in the employment business at all, because the biggest problems that we have in employment right now have nothing to do with what the Federal Reserve is doing. They have to do with our broken education system. They have to deal with issues that have to be dealt with by legislatures and other government bodies, not the Federal Reserve. And so I think we need to get them focused on the things they ought to be focused on. We need to keep them from being able to self-deal in U.S. debt. They should not be artificially holding down interest rates below what market levels would be, because by doing both of those things, they have contributed towards our current challenge. And hopefully we'll be able to navigate our way. I'm going to come back in because I can't see you anymore. So I'm going to come out. I'm going to come right back in. Okay.
Okay. We'll see you in a minute, David.
Well, that'll
Steve,
give me
what do you have?
Well, I'm going to wait for David to come back, but here's what I want to ask him. I'll wait for him to come back in. But I heard Fareed Zakaria talk about this on one of his shows, that the policies of the Fed actually don't really do anything to help the working families of America, because all it's doing is to fight inflation, increasing interest rates, which is making it harder for them to pay off their credit cards, to get loans, to buy cars, because you're contracting the economy. So why can't Congress? Okay, so David, my question is, I heard Fareed Zakaria talk about this a couple weeks ago on a show in his commentary, and he just talked about how the Federal Reserve isn't playing a role of actually helping the working families. Many of them, having a hard time making ends meet. Yes, they're fighting inflation by increasing the rates, but by doing that, they're actually hurting American workers because of contracted economy, and that Congress should be doing more in their duties to actually help with supply chain disruptions and things like that. Where do you stand on that?
Well, first, I have a great respect for Fareed. He's a very bright guy, and I had a chance to be on this program one time a number of years ago. But look, one of the reasons we are where we are is because the Federal Reserve aided and embedded fiscal irresponsibility for years. The Federal Reserve aided and abetted this mindless, dangerous, modern monetary theory in recent years. The theory that says that deficits and debt don't matter as long as you can borrow in your own reserve currency, unless and until you have excess inflation. They held down interest rates artificially low for too long. They ended up buying trillions of dollars of treasuries directly, so which served to artificially compress interest rates, and we didn't have market interest rates. So, their loose money policy combined with the excess spending by the Congress has fueled the inflation that we have right now. Okay. That's been exacerbated because of dramatic change in energy policy, some supply chain challenges. And has Ukraine had something to do with that? Yes, but it's by no means the major contributing factor. Okay. So I think, and I come back to what I said, the Fed is supposed to help promote economic growth, maintain stable prices, and try to help employment. The Congress is not doing enough. The Fed was doing too much for too long, okay? And now we need to get them to refocus just on maintaining stable prices and promoting economic growth. Nothing else. No more, no less. And Congress needs to get off its duff and start being able to address, the fiscal challenges and the many other challenges that we face,
But speaking of that economic growth and everything else, look, speaking of that economic growth, and this is my question for you, David, because I'd love to hear your thoughts around this and everything. It actually comes back to something Steve said earlier, because he was talking about those hotel people that were from Indian descent and that whole mattress story and everything. But and this may surprise some people because this person was actually a Republican, and I consider myself more of a Democrat and all of that. But there was a space in time, there was a thing called enterprise zones. And I believe Nixon was very much involved in that and all along those lines. And I was wondering your thoughts as to whether we might need some more enterprise zones, because I know one of the complaints I hear in the African-American community is how fast the money goes out and doesn't stay in those communities because not enough business is being developed in those communities. So I was just wondering your thoughts around enterprise zones.
I think enterprise zones, if properly designed and effectively implemented, have real merit. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I used to live in a city called Bridgeport, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. I lived there until I moved back to Alexandria, Virginia. Bridgeport is a very challenged city. Very high poverty rate, degree of unemployment, big gaps between the haves and the have-nots. And they benefited from an enterprise zone. And I think, that's something that, but again, that's a legislative thing. That's nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. That's something that the Congress has to do. And then when you authorize those and when you appropriate funds to be able to support those, or tax preferences to be able to support those, you got to be able to make sure they get effectively implemented and that they're being used for the intended purpose. Not just to prevent abuse, but also to help make sure that the people that are intended to be helped, in fact, are helped. That's people in the local community that are disproportionately in poverty, and in many cases, disproportionately people of color.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think that's kind of connecting the dots here of what we wanted to do. I think the student debt situation hasn't helped any because the students graduate, they're way up to here in debt. They're not able to stimulate the economy with their education because they can't afford to do anything. So I think that there's a combination of so many things going on. And, unfortunately for many of these students, when they do come out, the jobs just haven't been there or they're outsourced to other countries. So
Kim, we got to be careful.
I agree.
We talk about student debt, but we also have to recognize that a lot of these young people have a tremendous amount of credit card debt.
Mm-hmm.
And the interest rates on credit card debt are a lot higher than student loan debt. Okay. And the fact of the matter, as we've talked about before, in 36 states, they don't even have a basic financial literacy. They don't know how to do a budget. They don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know the differences between, different sources of credit that you can get. And, the power of compounding can work for you or against you or whatever else. I mean, so that, the education part, is a real key part, but we got to keep in mind this country has never had more available jobs than it has right now. There has never been as big a gap between the number of jobs that are available and the people who are looking for jobs. There are twice as many jobs available today as there are people looking for jobs. All right.
Yeah.
And got to ask, what's the problem? Okay.
But David, you just brought up an interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that I just thought about as you were saying that is there was a time that a lot of the credit cards are being targeted toward college kids, and some of these are specialty credit cards because I know that there were like specialty credit cards by some of our celebrities. I think Damien Dash and some others were doing some things, maybe even Puff in that credit card space and all along those lines. And I'm wondering, aren't we seeing something similar with the whole crypto craze where people are being kind of hoodwinked into something along those lines, just like they were the credit card thing? But I was just wondering your thoughts around that because as you were saying that, I was going like, that sounds similar.
First, I'm not a crypto fan. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. And I know that Nick has got a crypto coin that used to be worth a lot, but it's not worth nearly as much as it used to be. But
we got ours at the same place.
Yeah, but a lot more than what you paid for or what you got. But look, let me come back just for a second to the imbalance.
Right.
Twice as many job openings as people looking for work. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I will explain one is they were convinced to stay home and make money. And then, things reopened and nobody wanted to go back to work. But like Delta is having to cut a lot of their flights right now. I was talking to someone high up in Delta, and they said that literally they have no employees to handle all the flights that they need. So they're paying well with beautiful benefits. Benefits.
My wife worked for them for 31 years. She's a retiree, but
beautiful company. Beautiful.
But they are a very good company. But here's my point. There are lots of reasons. One reason is because there's a supply and demand imbalance between what we need in the economy and the skills and knowledge that people have to bring to bear. Secondly, in some cases, people are just unrealistic. They're wanting something that they're not qualified for or not going to get. And in some cases, the government has been giving them enough money they hadn't had to work.
That's right.
All right. So there's a number of reasons why we are where we are, but we need to analyze these things and we need to go to root causes. All right. Because when you've got twice as many jobs available as people looking for jobs, there is a structural problem that needs to be addressed.
Right.
In that educational structure, shouldn't part of it be also being teaching some of these things that we need for those jobs? Like I know that a lot of people are not being taught Spanish and everything. And to Ken's point, I was actually part of a business conference and they were hyping the whole notion of working in or creating jobs in the metaverse. But one of the people was very honest and they said that, it sounds good, but you do need to learn Python and some of those other programs that exist in order to create those things. You just can't jump into it and think you're going to create a metaverse without learning some of those languages that I don't even understand. You're a computer scientist,
Yes,
Kim. You might
yeah.
understand.
We're at the hour. So
Okay.
unfortunately, I'm going to have to wrap and maybe we can continue
I
this.
love it, David. You just get my mind just so intellectually
I know.
stimulated.
I
feel
get
like
so
read.
excited. I
My
could do this
pleasure. My
for
pleasure.
2
I have a book-
hours.
I have a book to recommend today. I like to do book recommendations now since I do a lot of
Please
other
do.
commentating. Ro Khanna's book called I think it's called Dignity in Tech. He's a U.S. congressman from Silicon Valley. He came to North Carolina. Really fascinating book about big tech. But one of the chapters talks about incentivizing tech companies to invest in more rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
So even in North Carolina, because that in and of itself could create those jobs closer to where they are, which is a big problem, right? And so I would recommend you to read the book. It's by Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents Silicon Valley. Very smart young. He's the head of the Samosa Caucus, which is the Indian delegation in Congress, and hopefully I'll be joining them in a year or two. But
Good luck. That's great.
Well,
Thank you so much, everybody.
And everyone,
All right.
thank you for
See you
joining
next
us,
week.
David. We'll see you next week. And folks, become more financial literate and get more involved with what we need to do as a community to reduce this debt, and start listening to what we're talking about here, and go out and do your own research and do some of these hashtags. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Great conversation.
Oh, it was amazing, and we're a wrap.
Yep, that's a wrap. Just like that.